Hello everybody, my name is Jimmy, and today you join me for a very special edition of Jimmy Does Knitting. Today we're going to learn how to knit the Troy Boy. We're going to knit this sweater that I'm wearing right here. It is my own design. It is a top-down drop shoulder. It is knit top-down from the back down, and then you pick up for the front, knit the front flat, and then join in the round in stockinette until you get to the hem. Then you go sleeves top down. It's pretty simple. I'd say this is probably first or second sweater worthy. Because of this video, you should be able to knit along with me. I give you a bunch of tips and tricks. The pattern is available on Ravelry to download. Now, if you're getting this within the first week, there is a sweet little discount code for you. But if not, feel free to buy, support me, and we can knit along. So the Troy Boy comes because this is a basic sweater. I am from a place called Troy, and there is nothing more basic than the Troy Boy, and I wanted that to communicate. Plus, it's a fun name. This is a solid fingering weight men's sweater that you can use. You can add to it because it's quite plain. You can play with a bunch of yarns. You can add stripes. You can do whatever you want, but it's also a great staple garment. And it's really lightweight for those men maybe that get hotter. It just has a bigger yoke depth and a little bit broader over shoulders, but anybody can wear this. What the design features are is the top-down construction. It's pretty simple and pretty plain. The only thing that's really of note is that I have the seam from the underarm and it carries on into the arm, and then it goes into the ribbing, and it also goes into the hem. So there are two versions. One is this. This is the basic version. This one in particular has some body shaping, which you don't have to do. You can just knit straight until the hem. It has a folded over neckline, and then it has the basic version of the sides. There is a fancy version, which I will try on for you now. This is my fancy version of the Troy Boy. There are some additional modifications to this. I did a single neckline. I didn't do the fold over collar. And then there's this lovely detail of twisted stitches, which make a little cable right along the edge of that seam that was in the basic version. So there are some options with this sweater. You can mix and match. I give you information on how to do that in the pattern. And then aside from that, you can go and have some fun. So we will be knitting the light gray version that I showed you. That is knit in West Wool Bicycle. This was gifted to me kindly by Stephen and Penelope. They are my local yarn store. This is the color Dutch Sky. This was picked out because this is ultimately going to my dad, and he wanted this. And I think it's really kind of nice because Troy is where I come from. Amsterdam is where I live now, and this has a Dutch color name and a Dutch yarn, and it gets brought back to Troy. So there will be a Troy Boy in Troy, which I think is really cool. This version that I'm wearing is from my Mondiem obsession phase. This is the Mondiem. I have an extra skein of this, so that's why this one's all packed up. That's all I had of the 8th skein of my bicycle, but it's by Retrosario Rosa Pumar. It is a fingering weight non-superwash. This is their color 119. It's just the black one. I must say, I love this. I think it's great. So those are the two recommended yarns. Those are the yarns that are knit in the sample. As you can see, the fancy version has less ease on me. So I elongated the sleeves a little bit, and the basic version has a little bit more ease. So it works with a bunch of different body types and type of ease. In general, you can also modify to make the shoulders or the armhole depth a little bit shorter if that's your preference, but it's not written in the pattern. In general, these are sized more towards a male leaning type of fit. So you can really make what you want out of this sweater pattern, which I think is great. I just needed something that was stockinette in the round that was fingering weight and simple, and I was really having a hard time finding like a basic drop shoulder staple. For this pattern, there are some notions that you're going to need and some tools. I used a 3.25 millimeter fixed needle, and it was wide enough for me to do the circumference, and then I could also do it on the shoulders as magic loop. So that's all you really need. Of course, I had a couple of testers that wanted to make the cuffs a little bit tighter, so they went down a needle size for that, and then you need something else. You can also use DPNs, short circulars to get that. It's really up to you and your preference. The collar also I knit on 3.25 millimeters, but I would suggest if you like a tighter fitting collar, going down a size to 2.75 millimeters. Aside from that, you will need a tapestry needle. You will need stitch markers and anything else that you like to use with it. It's really meant to be a low barrier to entry. You don't really need a whole lot of stuff in order to make this sweater work. I think for me personally, what I used the most were fixed light bulb markers. And what I do is I use that to count the decreases under the underarm. And so I used however many of those I did for my size, and then I moved them onto the other arm. So that's the most intensive amount of kit that you're going to need for this. I will also say that there are many ways to accomplish this pattern. I'm just going to take you through how I did it with some tips and tricks. I know there are other ways of doing it. For example, I knit continental style. I don't do English style. I give an example of how to do a 2x2 tubular bind off for the cuffs. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. Do whatever works for you. There are many ways to knit this and little tricks, but I think that's a decent amount of chit chat for now. So let's get into the pattern. The first thing I want to discuss is swatching. I think that this is really important. Some of my testers were able to get gauge all right. Some of the testers were not. I know that the yarn that I used, the Mondiem, was a little bit thinner and the West Wool was a little bit thicker. So I had to reconcile that in how I knit. And the reason how you do that is by swatching. I suggest a larger swatch. This is probably like, I don't know, 12 by 12 centimeters, 5 by 5 inches, if not bigger. It's just stockinette flat. If you know that your gauge changes in the round, you should also knit in the round and see if you need to adjust. I think a lot of people could have some variations between the flat knitting, the round knitting, and then the sleeve circumference. Each gets you progressively tighter as you knit. Just something to be aware of. In most garments, I don't think it's much of an issue, but if that's something that really changes in how you knit, then I would suggest that you make accommodations for that so that the sweater fits in the way that you want to do it. All right, so we've done our swatch and we know what size we're going to make. We have the ease that we're going to do, so let's get ready to cast on. As said previously, I am using West Wool Bicycle in the color Dutch Sky for this. It's a nice 100% merino wool from Stephen and Penelope that was gifted to me for this project, and we're going to make it. So we need to start with the cast on. So we have our yarn here, and then the tail on the far end is connected to the yarn, and then the loose tail is connected to this part of the thread in the slingshot position. The reason why this is because this side that's closest to you typically uses less yarn when you make a long tail cast on. So a lot of people tend to have that way, but you can do whatever you need to as long as you can cast on. Now, there are two ways of starting this long tail cast on. Some people make a slip knot like this and put it on the needle, and that's their first stitch. But I prefer a slightly different method, and let me show you that. So you have your slingshot, you put the needle on, and you go roll under and over, and you just have this little twist that happens. And for me, that's a less bulky, a little bit more clean way to start the long tail cast on. So we need to cast this on loosely because otherwise it will be way too tight. So have a loose cast on. Long tail cast ons tend to be slightly tighter and not stretchy. To do that, we're going to angle our hands up. We're going to go under the far leg here. Go to the furthest leg away, wrap underneath, and pull through that loop. Now don't do it too tight. Let's do this again. So I go the closest loop to me, under, wrap around the far loop, and pull through here. One more time, closest loop to me, go under, go around the far one, and pull it through that space that you've created. So that is the long tail cast on. Now, what you can do for casting on is take a stitch marker like this. I prefer a light bulb stitch marker, and every 20, 10, whatever how many rows that you want, you can go and put that in, so it helps you with counting and you don't get lost. So I'm going to cast on the stitches for the back collar, and I will join you once I'm done. So as you can see, we have our long tail cast on. We have the strand that's going from the ball, which is our working yarn, and then we have a tail. You can cut the tail, it doesn't really matter. The stitches may be twisted, but see how it's loose cast on? That's fine. It doesn't matter if it's slightly inconsistent. The long tail cast on is a fairly tight cast on. I did use a stitch marker to help me count, and I'll just remove that as I get to it. But let's start with the knitting. So I'm going to take my needles, and I'm just going to knit the first row plain, and then I'll get back to you after that. Alright, we have knit the first row. Row 2, purl all stitches. Okay, we are ready to start the make ones purls and make ones knits. So we're going to be knitting on the back side. So this is the prototype version. This is the fancy version done in Mondiem. And what we're going to do is establish this increase right here along the back yoke. And what we're going to do is we're going to knit 2 on the right side, purl 2 on the wrong side, make a stitch, and then continue knitting stockinette. And what that does is the first knit stitch counts as a selvage stitch. So you don't see that here at all. But what you do see is the second knit stitch, which is just a little bit of a guide for your eye and for when you pick up stitches, that you're going to have one row of stitching that's going to be exposed before all of the increases. So let's get to that. We have established on the knitting now the right side and the wrong side. You can clearly see, let me zoom in. You can see here it's little, but this is the right side because you have those V's of the stitches like that. And then this is the wrong side. You could see all of the purls. So that is what we are working with. So what I need to do is knit 2, 1, 2, and then make 1 left. And what we need to do is we need to make a stitch that's leaning this way. It's going this way. It's expanding towards the inside of the back. And the way we do it is, if you see this right here, you see these ladders between the stitches? This part right here is what we're going to use to knit into it. So let's do that. Now, to make it left leaning, we're going to go like this and position it on the stitch like this, because this now is leaning this way. The front is here, the back is there. So we have our left leaning stitch, and what we need to do is when we knit this, we need to twist it. So we can put our needle in, we can roll it around until it's in the back. See this back leg here? That's the one we want to knit into it. And then we knit that stitch, and that creates a nice tight stitch in the fabric. And then we're going to knit to the end. All right, we are at the point where we want to make a right increase, a right facing make one. And what we need to do is we need the stitch going this way. We want it going in towards the back of the yoke. So we're going to do something similar to what we did for the make one left. And we're going to grab the bar, this one, in between the two stitches. But this time, we're going to place it the opposite side, opposite way on the needles. And I always remember this. I always think of a drag queen saying, right to the back, honey. And so that right leg right here is on the back. And that means we're going to twist to the right. So we're going to do something similar, and we're going to twist this stitch. So we're going to knit through the left leg of the stitch, this one, and we're just going to take that and knit. And you have your right leaning make one. Let's do that one more time. So we have the stitch. Ooh, let me take this off. We're going to pick up the ladder between the two. We're going to place it to the right. I'm going to knit into this leg that's on the left leg, slip it off the needles, and there you have your right leaning increase. You just knit the other two. Turn the work. Now we're going to do right and left increases, but on the purl side. It's the same principle, but we can practice this together. So let me get the yarn to the front. We are going to purl 2, 1. We're going to grab the ladder in between, and just like for the make one left knit, we're going to place it on like that. So this way, the stitch is pointing this way. It's going left. You can see that it's going left. And the front leg, the right leg, is on the front of the needle. So now what we want to do is we need to twist this stitch. So like we did with the the left increase on the knit side, we're going to knit through this back loop. But because it's a purl stitch, we're going to purl it. So this is a little bit more cumbersome. We pick up that back loop. Can you see that? If we pick up that back loop, and we purl that. One more time. We have our stitch mounted with it pointing back to the left, and then we're going to put yarn in front and purl through that back loop. It's a little bit tricky, especially when you're trying to talk and demonstrate. And that sometimes takes a little bit of effort, but we got there. And now we have our twisted stitch. And then we purl to the end, or we purl to the last 2 stitches, and we're going to do a make one purl right. All right, so we've knit to the last 2 stitches. Now we want to make one right purl. And we're going to do that very similar to what we did on the knit side. So we're going to take the ladder in between the 2 stitches. We're going to put that up into the needle, and we're going to go right to the back. So the left side of the stitch is on the front, and then the right side is on the back. Then we need to twist it. So we're going to put the yarn in front, and we're just going to purl this front loop this time. And that makes a make one right purl. And then you just purl the last 2 stitches. So we're going to repeat rows 1 and 2 of the increase rows as many times as the pattern tells you to. And what we're going to end up with is a shaped back yoke. So we're going to repeat these rows until the pattern tells you not to, but then that has the shaped back yoke like this. See that? That's creating the shoulder shaping and a little bit of the depth for the back yokes. These are where we do all the increases on the right side and the wrong side. And then after that, as you can see on the shoulder, we just knit straight down until we meet the yoke depth. All right, so we've done our back yoke now. I did block this because it's all stockinette stitch. It's going to curl a little bit. So we have the back yoke, we've done our increases in the top, we've knit down to the yoke depth, and I have this on hold just on some strings. If you have a spare pair of needles, you could do that. You could use some embroidery thread, whatever you like. So what we're going to do next is we're going to do the shoulders and the collar shaping. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to pick up around here. We're going to start with this left side. We're going to pick up a knit. We're going to knit straight a little bit, and then we're going to increase on the collar side in order to make that more collar shaped. And then we're going to put those stitches on hold, and then we're going to move over to the right shoulder. We're going to pick up the stitches here, and then we're going to knit straight, and then we're going to increase along the collar edge. And that way we can just do a backwards loose cast on and then go straight. But we'll get to that when we get to it. So the next step is picking up and knitting. So this is a little bit of a confusing term, and I want to be able to talk about it with everybody. When you pick up and knit, it's an industry standard term. I think if you just said pick up stitches, I think it means just like go like this. Which is not what we want to do. This ruins things. It's too tight. I did that on my first sweater I ever knit, and it was a mistake. So let me show you how to pick up and knit. To pick up and knit, what you do is you take your yarn, however you hold it, and then in this pattern, it has this ridge here, if you can see, of just stockinette before the increases. So you had your selvage stitch that you did your knit 2. So you had your selvage stitch, and then you have this one, which is going to act as a little datum so you can see where to pick up and knit. And by picking up and knitting, what I mean is you go into that selvage stitch from the front to the back, just stick your needle through right here, and you grab a stitch from behind and pull it up. And that's it. You do not re-knit or anything after that. So you go through right where you need to in the selvage stitch, you pick that up, and there you have it. So that's what pick up and knit is. And you're going to continue doing this all the way through until you have the correct number of stitches that you need on the needle to start with the shoulder shaping. So let me pick up a couple more and show you. So what this does is we have this stitch here that is clearly defined, and then you have the knits on the other side, and then on the back it looks like this, where it looks like it's the one selvage stitch. So that's what we want to do, and that's how you pick up and knit. Let's pick up and knit all of these stitches right here, and then we'll go to the next part. We're on the right side of the work. Here you can see that I picked up and knit all of the stitches for the left shoulder. There is that datum line of the one stitch right here, and here are the stitches. The next step is we're just going to knit straight for how long the pattern tells you to. So we're going to turn our work, and now we're on the wrong side, and we're just going to pick up and purl these stitches. So just going to follow the instructions for a little bit. We're going to purl these stitches. The next we'll go for the other side. We'll follow the same but opposite instructions, where we pick up and knit, we knit flat for a little bit, and then we do some increases for some neck shaping, and then I'll join you back for the back collar, or for the front collar, so we can take a look at that backwards loop cast on and what that does to the garment. And I will see you then. As discussed, we needed to knit down the right shoulder. So I've knit down most of that. I still have a couple of stitches left to do. So let's do those together and then get into the backwards loop cast on. gonna knit the last couple. And there we go. So what we need to do is we're gonna put them on this needle, and it doesn't matter if you knit continental or English or a combination like me, you can do this technique for whatever way you want. So you hold the yarn in your left hand, and what I like to do is make a loop with my thumb like this. So I go under and loop it over. And then what I do is I take my needle and I just put it through this front loop right here, the loop closest to me, and slide off. And there I have my backwards loop cast on. Let's do that one more time. So I'm going to loop this around my finger, and I'm going to pull it through, and pull it through. And then you have an extra stitch. So we've made 2 stitches now. What I would advise is that you don't do this too tight, because on the way back it's going to be difficult to pick in, but I wouldn't do it too loose either. So we need to make sure that there is a nice combination, and you have to keep repeating this until you have the number of stitches that it says in the pattern. We're going to use this again for the underarm, but for now we're just using this for the collar. Let me cast on the number of stitches I need, and then I will join you back for the picking up of the left sleeve. One thing you want to be mindful of when you do the backwards loop cast on is you see this ridge here, that's the base of the stitch, and you want to make sure that you don't twist it. So it's very easy to have it go like this when you're casting on, but we don't want that, we want it nice and straight. So we have our right shoulder knit up, we have our neckline. Let's get into the left shoulder and getting that back incorporated to the piece. Here I have mine on a scrap piece of yarn. So let's cut this and put these things back on the needles. And what I like to do is you have your free end of the needle. This one has the stitches on it, and you have your other end. And we're gonna set it up like we're going to knit it. So we get through here and then just put the stitches back on the needle. Mine are reversed because I knit continental style, so all these stitches are technically backwards, but I think that's fine. So you just slip them through, remount them, and then when that's all done, you can pull out the yarn and start working. All right, so the stitches are on the left needle now, and we have all of our stitches that we need live. So let's get into it. First, we need to pull out the yarn that's on the tail. And if everything's mounted correctly, you should just be able to pull right out, and then all the stitches are live. Now, I will say that my stitches, some are mounted correctly, some are not. It's just how I picked them up. But the good thing about knitting is that you can fix that when you get to it. So mostly my stitches are mounted in the wrong direction or the twisted direction. Normally, when you have a stitch on the needle, it's like this, with the right leg in front and the left leg in back. But because I combination knit and however I picked this up, it's the opposite way. So the right leg is in the back and then the front leg is in the left. And that's opposite to normal. So what we want to do is correct that when we get to it. And we just want to knit into the right leg. So wherever that may be, if it's in the back or the front, we're just going to knit into the right leg, and that will get us a nice untwisted stitch, much like the rest of the fabric. So let's get into it. Let's untangle my yarn because I tangled it when I did that. Let's make sure the cast on stitches are nice and aligned like that. Don't want any twists in there. And then honestly, it's really simple. We just knit up the left side of the work. And the first stitch is going to be a little loose because you cut that tail, but then you just knit. And then you knit to the other end. I would double check your stitch count to make sure you have the correct number of stitches. And then from there, you knit back and forth until you have the yoke depth that you want. So it should match the back side of the fabric that you've already done. You've done the back yoke. Here we're just making the front yoke, and we're going to measure that from this point. So we want to measure from the cast on edge what the front yoke depth is, so that way it's nice and even. If you measure from here, that's not going to work, because the way that it works is this is going to slope. So your shoulders are going to be about here. If you fold it in half, this little extra fabric will actually be on the back. So just keep that in mind when you're measuring the yoke depth. Make sure not to twist your stitches, and continue knitting backwards and forwards. And I will meet you right when we get to the joining in the round. I've knit the front yoke. It's at the same length as the back. So that point that we need to measure from is this part right here. And when that part of the front meets the back, then we're the same. Now I did not steam the front, and that's why it's curling. That's normal, that's fine. I've ended on a wrong side row, and then the yarn is here. So we are going to join in the round next. And to do that, I need to knit across, and then I'll show you how to create this in the round. But first, let me knit, and I will join you back on the close cam. We are going to start binding this to the back. What we have to do for that is the front yoke, we're going to knit one more row. This is the right side row, almost all the way across. And then what we're going to need are 2 stitch markers. I'm very tactile, and I like to feel a difference. But what we need is one, which I'm going to use this green one for, is the beginning of row marker, and then one for the halfway point for underneath the sleeve. And that way I can tell which is which, and it will give me a bit of a datum, especially for the setup rows. This is super helpful. I think once that is over, you can potentially remove the markers, or specifically the other marker, but we're not there yet. Let's get started. We need to finish knitting this row, and then we can start the underarm cast on. So knit a couple of stitches, oops. And then this is going to be the same for all sizes and all motifs that you're using for the Troy Boy. And we're going to backwards loop cast on like we did for the neck. And we're going to cast on 6 stitches this way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm going to take my halfway marker, which in this case is this marker. I'm going to slip it on, and then I'm going to cast on 6 more stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now, what we need to do is we need to get the stitches from the back that were on our hold yarn, and we're going to knit down this side of it for the back. So if you look at it folded over frontwise, we're now on the left shoulder. This is the left shoulder, and we're down at the yoke, and we need to switch from the flat to in the round. So we're going to fold it over. I'm going to place the other stitches of the back onto the needle, and then we'll continue knitting, and I will meet you at the other side. So I've knit along the back now, and we have the front stitches right here on the needle. Right now we're under the right underarm. So let's finish this one cast on row to join in the round, and then we'll talk about setting up for the pattern. So let me knit these last 2 stitches. 1, 2. And then we're going to cast on 6 stitches with the backwards loop cast on. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm going to place my beginning of round marker this time right there. And then cast on 6 more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then we're going to join the front and the round, and this will complete joining the body. You just knit. And we're going to knit like this all the way until our cast on under the underarm again, and we're going to set up for both the fancy and the basic version, and I will show you how to do that after I'm done with this row. So we're at the left underarm part of the cast on that we did. You can see our marker, 6 cast on stitches, the knitting, 6 cast on stitches, and the knitting. And what we want to do is we want to knit across, and we want to make sure that the twist, it doesn't twist. So I'm making sure that the cast on loop is at the bottom of everything. And we're gonna knit to 4 stitches before the marker. And this is why you wanna do a loose cast on, so these things aren't super tight to come on because they can be difficult. One more. Now, if we were doing the fancy version, what I would do here is purl, knit, knit, purl. And that's the setup. And then you slip the marker, and then you do a purl, knit, knit, purl. And what that does is it has like a little receded column, 2 stitches for the twist that we'll be doing, and then 1 for the purl stitch. Now this, eventually, these 2 stitches on either side of this marker will go down into the rib and to the cuff. And that's how we plan on doing it. If you have a cable, that's also going to be going down there. So let's do the basic version, because that's one I'm knitting right now. And we're just gonna knit until 1 stitch before the marker, which can be a little tricky. Ooh. 1 stitch before the marker. We purl this stitch, and this is setting up for the purl stitches that go down the side seam. If we can purl, hold on. We slip the marker once. I'm going to purl 1 stitch, and then if I was doing the fancy version, I would knit, knit, purl, but I'm not. So we're just going to continue on knitting across. And as you can see, it's usually a little bit more difficult with the backwards loose cast on. Once you get a couple of stitches, it's much easier to fly through this. You don't have to think about it as much or go as slow, which is quite nice. And there you have it. You will do this on the other side with the beginning around marker, and then everything is set up for you to go around and round and round in the body. What I would like to show you is a sample of the fancy version. So the fancy version has these twisted cables like this going down the side, and here you have the purl stitch that we just discussed, the 2 knit stitches, you have 2 purls where the marker would be in between both, 2 knit stitches, a purl, and then assume that this is the body in the back. And what we want to do is we want to twist once every 4th row. So how do we figure that out without counting and being a pain? Well, there's an easy trick to this. If you look here, there's 1 stitch that's always a little elongated. Do you see that here? And then also here? That is the stitch that we twisted on. So if you separate your knitting some, you can see the purl stitch and then the knit stitches, and then there are ladders here. So if you put your needle in between, like that, you have the purl row that we did, and then you have, or the knit row, twist row that we did, and then 3 rows after that. And that's how you count how many rows you have in between your cables. It's a really good trick and especially useful on this. And since we're twisting every 4th row, we're at a row where we need to twist. So let's do that. I have my needles, and I have tutorials about the right twist and the left twist in a little bit more detail, but we'll go over it here once I untangle all of my yarn. I'm going to knit up to that purl stitch, we're going to purl one, and then we want to twist. So this you can do with a cable needle, but I do not like to use a cable needle for this because it's very simple to just do it with a twisted stitch. We want this one going to the right like this. So as you know, to decrease to the right, we do knit 2 together. To decrease to the left, we do slip, slip, knit. And that gets us the direction we want, and that's good to know for this. To twist right, first thing we do is we knit these 2 stitches together, just like a knit 2 together. And instead of removing this off the needle, I'm going to keep it on. And then I'm going to knit through the first stitch again, just the first stitch, pull through, and come off. And there you can see we have a right leaning twisted cable. Let's purl the next 2 stitches. And let's do a left leaning cable. Now, this first stitch is going to be twisted if we keep it like this. So currently it's mounted on the needle like this. We need to mount it on the needle like this, just like we would do for a slip, sit, knit. The second stitch is fine how it is. We don't need to touch it. So I like to just pop my needle in, turn it around, and see how it's mounted the wrong way now. You can see, especially up top, that it's leaning this way and all the other stitches are leaning the opposite way. So what we do for this one is I knit in the back of the second loop first. Just knit. I keep it on my needles, and then I knit through the back of the both loops right there. And there you have a left leaning twisted stitch. So let me finish this row and then put this down, and you can see what I'm talking about. So here you can see we've done the left leaning twist, the right leaning twist. We have our stitches in the middle, which are going to go into the hem and the cuff, and same thing with these. And we have just a nice little separating stitch for the purls right here, and then the body in front. So that is how you do the fancy version without a cable needle and the twisted stitches. Let's talk decreases. For the fancy version, you're going to be decreasing on the 2 stitches to the right or left of that 1 purl stitch. So you have the motif here, which is the center 2, 4, 6, 8. So we don't want to touch that. And then for the basic version, you just have the 2 purl stitches right there. So you'll always be combining these 2 stitches next to them together when we reduce. And the way that we do that is really, really simple. The way that these are structured are to give the body more of a V shape. So this is going to be leaning this way, this is going to be leaning this way, and when you come together, it's going to be leaning like this on the final garment. And what we want to do is make sure that they lean in a similar way for the reduction. Now, whether you're doing the body decreases or not, you're still going to have to do some of this because we need to make sure that the ribbing is correct. So you either do 3 for some shaping, or you just do 1 right before the ribbing, and that will get it to you. I'm going to show you on the fancy version how to do the decreases. So these are the 2 stitches that we need to decrease right here. This is the motif, we don't touch that, 2 stitches. And what we're going to do is we're just going to knit 2 together. pass that over, and we've reduced one stitch. Then we just knit the motif again, getting to the other side. And then these are the two stitches that we need to decrease. And this time we're going to do a slip slip knit. And to do that, what you do is you slip off of these two stitches, you reorient them backwards. So just like that first stitch with the twisted stitch, they were mounted like this on the needle, and now we want them mounted like this on the needle. And all you do is you take your needle and knit through the back loop, and then continue knitting. And this is how you do the decreases for the body. Once we're done with this and we've got it to 3.5 inches before the length that we want to end, I will show you the ribbing and we can make sure that that all works. And then we will go into a really cool technique for an Italian bind off if you're interested. But I will meet you back there when you get there. I wanted to show you how I do a tubular bind off for 2x2 ribbing. I love a tubular bind off, and I think that this is like the best way to finish a sweater if you can. It's a personal preference, and I've spent some time perfecting it, and this is what it's going to look like. Now this is unblocked still because I have yet to block the sweater, but we're pretty close to the end of it. But anyway, this is the hem of a 2x2 rib, and then we're going to do it for the cuff. I'm going to show you on the cuff because it's a little bit shorter and easier to do. I would say that this is a little bit more of an advanced technique, but it's still doable. I'm also going to preface this with this is how I do it and not how everybody else does it. So I'm a combination knitter, so I do some weird things with my stitches. Basically when I purl, I flip the stitches. They're switched backwards. And I also knit continentally, which has something to do with how I'm going to approach this, specifically how I do a Norwegian purl. I find that Norwegian purls in a tubular bind off are actually very helpful because of the yarn being positioned behind the stitch as opposed to a regular purl where you put it before the stitch. But we'll get to all of that. And I just wanted to share this because I thought it was a nice way of doing it, and I have not seen anybody else do it the way that I do. So yeah, let's get into it. There's going to be a couple of steps. First, we're going to get the stitches in order. And what I mean by in order is there's no really 2x2 tubular bind off. You can see I have 2 knits, 2 purls, 2 knits, 2 purls. And we want to make this knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl. And the way that I do that is with twisted stitches. So a lot of tutorials are going to tell you to take 2 stitches off the needle and then like rearrange them and have something to do with that. And I think that it creates a weird jog that I don't particularly like. And I think that it's actually more fluid in the way that I knit to do twisted stitches to achieve that instead of like knitting a row and like removing some stitches and maybe dropping down. I think that that's just too fiddly. Okay, I'm at the end of a row before the setup round. So let's just purl this one stitch, and then I'm gonna slip the marker still just to keep track of the beginning of round. So what we wanna do is knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl. We have a purl to start off with in this occasion, so let's do that. So we purl, and then I knit, but then I want a purl. And what I essentially want to do in this case is I think it's neater when the knit stitch passes over the purl. So in order to do that on this occasion, this knit stitch has to go this way to the left, and it has to go over this purl, which goes under and to the right. So in order to achieve that, I'm going to do a left twisted stitch. It's a 1x1 twist. And the way that I'm going to do it is I'm going to turn my work and I'm going to knit well, first I'm going to switch this stitch around. And what that does is when I do this twisted stitch, this stitch isn't twisted. It turns out like the rest. If I keep it in the regular position, then it twists and it looks bad. And we don't want that. We're trying to do this to have a nice clean finish edge. So we've switched the orientation of the knit stitch. I'm going to go back. We're going to start with a Norwegian purl for the purl stitch. Just go in through the back loop. And then what we're going to do is we're going to knit these two stitches together. Through the back loop. And then we have our twisted stitch. So this is now a purl, this is now a knit. Now these are in order, so I'm going to purl, and I'm going to knit. We're going to have to twist these stitches again to get the purl and knit. So I'm going to reorient this stitch. I'm going to go in through the back loop. We're going to purl this stitch. And then we're going to knit these two together. And we have another twisted stitch. So I swear this is easier. It's just the camera angle is making this a bit more difficult for me, but this is a relatively smooth process if you can get your angle in right. To purl and then knit. So I'm going to finish this with the rest of the sleeve and get the stitches into knit purl, and then I will join you back for the 2 setup rows. I think the 2 setup rows are optional, but we'll go through them anyway. So for the setup row 1, we have now had everything knit purl, knit purl, knit purl orientation, and this is what it looks like. It looks fairly similar, but there we go. I'm going to slip the beginning of round marker, and for this first round, we are going to slip the purls with the yarn in front, and then knit the knits. Slip the purls with yarn in front, and knit the knits. So slip, knit, slip, knit, and then we do that until we get to our beginning of round marker. We have just finished knitting all the knits and slipping the purls with yarn in front. One more setup round, we're going to do the opposite. And by that I mean, we're going to purl the purls and we're going to slip the knits, but with yarn in back this time. So I like to keep the yarn in back the entire time, just to remind me what I'm doing, and I think it's a little bit nicer. So I do a Norwegian purl. And what that does is you have to hold your yarn in your left hand. I don't think this works with English style knitting. I'm unclear. But for continental knitters, what you do is you take your yarn, you keep it in back, and you slip under. You go through the loop that you need to. You twist up. You twist the yarn around, and then pull through. And so that's the Norwegian purl. I think it's just a little bit different, but it keeps the yarn orientation where I need it to for this. So I'm going to continue slipping and purling until I get to the beginning of the round, and then we're finally going to start the bind off proper. All right, I have one more stitch. It's a knit stitch. I'm going to slip this and we're ready to start the bind off. Now I can remove the beginning of row marker. We're not going to need this anymore. What we do need to do is we need to cut a tail of the yarn that's about 3.5. I usually do 3.5 because I like to be sure, but I'd rather have more yarn than not enough. But we're going to sew this in. So we're going to need some scissors to cut the yarn and then a tapestry needle. So let's thread this up. and get with the tubular bind off. So this is the same as a 1x1 tubular bind off. And it's also the same pattern as the Kitchener stitch. So it's a purl off, knit on, knit off, purl on. Let's go for this first stitch. So this is a purl stitch. So I'm going to purl this off, and then I'm going to knit this stitch. So I come in from behind the two loops right here, I grab at the front leg of the second stitch on the needle, and I pull it through. And that's your first stitch. For the knit stitches, we're going to knit off, just like this. And then the second stitch from the needle, we're going to purl through that front leg, just like this, and pull through. Now we're going to repeat that until we're done. So purl this one off, and then we're going to come in through the loop, grab the first leg, pull through. Knit off. We're going to purl through this knit stitch right here, which is the second stitch from the needle, pull through. Purl off. We're going to knit through the second stitch from the needle and pull off. One more time, we'll do both of these one more time. So we knit off, we're going to purl through the second stitch on the needle in the front leg, pull through, and we're going to purl this stitch off, and because this is a purl stitch, we're going to knit it. We're going to come in between the first two stitches, grab the front leg, and pull through. And so that is how you do a tubular bind off. And I like this because, see, this doesn't have a jog like it normally does. I mean, it has a little bit, but sometimes it's really quite obvious. And I think this has a nice round edge, and you can see it once again. It's going to look something like this when we're done. And it just makes a beautiful rolled hem, and it's finished. And then once this all blocks out, I think it will look even better. So that is how I do a 2x2 tubular bind off. Good luck. It's a bit customized to me, but I think that that's what works. And I think showing more techniques like these is really important to show that there are different ways to do certain things. So thank you for joining, and I will catch you in the next one. So let's talk collars. In the pattern, we have two different options, and I wanted to show you examples of each. This is the Troy Boy prototype, and this just has the single collar with a bind off. And then this is another sweater, but what this has is a 1x1 rib with a folded over collar, which is the other option for the Troy Boy. So let's just look at these. First, we'll go for the sample. If you look at this, all it is just one layer of knitting, and it's knit to X length, and then I used a tubular bind off for here. And I made this a bit tight because that is my preference, but in the pattern it's a lot looser, so you have more room for your head. But it's just a 1x1 rib with a bind off, and that makes a collar that lays nice and flat to your neck, and I think it has a nice little finish. Now the other option, which is what we're going to do in our sample that we're knitting together, is something similar to this. Now this is my Savin sweater by Megan Babin. And what it is, it's the 1x1 rib, but you knit it double the size. And I actually like to knit it a little bit more than double, because what that ends up doing is it gives it a little bit of playroom for the tacking down of things. And all you have to do is you knit it double the size, and then you fold it over, and then you somehow attach it to the inside of the collar. We are at that point in our sample, so let's bring it over. And what we've done here is I've started at the back shoulder, the back right shoulder, which is this point, and then I knit around and around and around until I got the length that I need to do the sew down. So it's a pretty easy 1x1 rib. We use the pickup stitches like we did for picking up this part, but we did it at the collar at the rate that was suggested. You can change this if you want something tighter or looser. And then if we look at the inside of this for just a brief moment, you have this edge where the pickup meets the collar. So these are two separate things, and this is the fabric, and then these are the stitches. Now what is going to be important is we're going to tack these down to this edge. And people have very specific ways of where they want to pick up. I would encourage you, as long as it's consistent and it's picked up on this edge, I think you'll be fine. But what you want to do is sometimes these can get twisted. So as you're knitting or sewing this down, you're going to want to make sure that these rows are aligned. You don't want them like all of these really tight here, because then it will have this crunchy, scrunchy, like warped effect, kind of like that in the final garment, and we don't want that. We want it nice and even. We want it looking pretty. We spent a lot of time doing this, so that is how we want to do it. Now, there are two ways to go about this. One is to knit it down, and another way is to sew it down. So I'm going to reposition the camera a little bit closer, and we'll get this neck tacked down to the folded neckline that we're aiming for. So there are two ways, as I said, of folding and tacking down this neck edge. What I would recommend is figuring out which one works for you. The first one, we still have the ball of yarn attached. You can cut it. If you do cut it for either one, you want it about 3 to 4 times the circumference of the neck in terms of yarn. That should give you enough to make sure that you're okay with the yarn and you don't run out. Usually I find about 3 to be fine, but just in case, cut about 4. And the first technique is knitting it down. So we want to get this ready to knit, and we're going to go a little bit back and forward, and I'm hoping that you can see this well. We're going to knit this stitch. It's the first stitch on the needle. I'm using magic loop, so I have this end that's also like this, so I know that the beginning of row started here at the back of my shoulder. A lot of times people have a marker if you're working small circulars or double pointed needles. That's how you can tell. But I don't have a marker, but I'm starting here. It's the beginning of a new row. I've reached the length that I want, so let's get into it. Let me put my yarn in my hand. So we want to go through this stitch. We want to figure out where it is. It's this one on the needle here. And we know that it ends roughly here. Right around here somewhere. Here, here-ish. But that's where we have the stitch going to. So, knowing that, this will be harder to show, but we take that stitch area that we want, pick up a stitch, put it on your needle, and then just knit 2 together. I suppose you could do this in knit purl pattern, but we're going to do it all knits because it's on the inside and nobody really sees, so it doesn't matter. So then you have 1 stitch, and then this is tacked down. You can see here it has this fold already, and it's there. So let's do another one. We have this stitch right here, and I can follow these ladders all the way down like this. And then I can pick up, let's say, this stitch with my needle, place it on, and oops, my stitches are twisted because I combination knit, but I think it's fine on the inside. We knit 2 together. So now we have 2 stitches on the needle. We combined off. Let's do it one more time. We have this stitch that we're going to stitch down. We're going to look on the inside. We're going to follow it. I don't know if you can see this very well, but what it ends up being is this stitch right here is what we want to tack it down to. Pick it up, put it on our needle, knit two together, and bind off. That is method one. Now, this is a great method. It works fine. That's not my preferred method. What I like to do is to cut the yarn to three times the yoke, circular yokes. Let's say that's 1. We'll cut it 2, 3, and then we'll give it a little bit extra just for fun. And we cut. So our working yarn here is done. We have this yarn tail that we're using for everything. We're going to take our tapestry needle. So for the second method, we have our tapestry needle. It's attached to the length that we want, and let's do it like this. So we're gonna slip this knitwise. We're gonna follow it down, and this is the stitch I need to knit into. So I just go under and tack it down. Let's do that one more time. Slip knitwise, figure out where the end of the stitch is. We need to pick up right here, if we can. And slip through. So this is how I tack down my collar. I'm gonna finish tacking this all down, and when you're done, you're just gonna have a nice rolled collar for this. Now, I like to do the collar at this stage in the process because once you wear a garment with the collar, it cinches in quite a bit. So you have a smaller neckline because before it was a lot bigger. And that will help when you try it on, since you're working top down. I'm assuming you're trying it on. You're figuring out the sleeve length a little bit better because you don't have that slack from the collar not being there. It's going to be as you wear it. So I would highly suggest putting the collar on either partially through the body or once you're done with the body and before you start the sleeves. That is it for now. I will meet you back for the sleeve pickup. We have finished the collar, and then I have knit down for the rest of the body, and we are ready to start the sleeves. So we have this big sleeve armhole right here, and what are we going to do with it? Well, let me show you on the sample of the fancy, which I've already done. We are going to essentially do this. So this is the body portion, and then this is the sleeve portion of the sweater. And what we want to do is essentially set ourselves up to carry this through along the entire way. So for the fancy version, let me rearrange this a little bit. What we want to do is we want to make a continuous cable. Now, for the basic version, which I'm going to show you, it's just this purl row, which is a lot easier. But currently, the cables are going like this on here, and what I did is I continued that up throughout on the sleeve. Now, if you want to change direction, that's fine. I did a little blip somewhere around here because but it was the underarm, so don't look too close. But we have essentially, this pattern is going to go from the hem, sorry for all the fluff, the hem, up the sides, through the underarm, and then down to the cuff. So this is the same thing that we're going to do with the hem and the cuff. So let's get our sample that we're working on, and let's have a look at this. On this version, we can see the 2 purl stitches for under the underarm, and then the rest of the stitches. So what we're going to need is, I like to have a couple of stitch markers, just like a light bulb stitch marker, and I use that to count however many pickup stitches that I have. But you don't have to, it's just for me. I'm also doing this in magic loop, so we can use the same needles as the rest of the body. And by doing that, I also don't place a marker for the center beginning of round, because it's really easy to tell. I know it's in between these 2 purl stitches that I'm going to have, but I think the instructions have it so you have the center of round marker. So that's just for your information. We are going to grab our needles and our cords, and we are going to pick up these stitches. I like to leave a little bit of a tail, and we're going to start with the front center. So like I said, you can see this purl bump and this purl bump here. These are our 2 purl stitches. So this one will be the last stitch and this one will be the first stitch. And we're just going to pick up like we did for the collar. So we're going to go under this purl stitch, grab a yarn, and bring it up. And then we're going to, for the ones, for the stitches here, we want them to go in the same row. And what I mean by that is we want the V to continue being a V going up. So we're going to go under here. We're going to pick up a stitch. Under this V, pick up a stitch. And continue that until we have, I believe it's 6 stitches on the needle. This is the wrong V. Let's do this one first. This one. This one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we have our 6 stitches. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go up the sleeve. Now, this is my trick. Susan Bryant can show you a lot better than me about how to do it, but here's where you need to act to avoid underarm holes. What happens is if you pick this stitch up and just knit into it like it is, it's going to have a gaping hole when you wear it. And we don't want that. We want nice little tight sleeves, just like you saw on the fancy version. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to pick up 2 extra stitches. Now this is not factored in the stitch count that I gave you for the pickup rate for everything. This is just a neat little trick that you can do to make sure your knitting is nice and tight. So I'm just going to pick up a stitch that I know is not going to create a hole, because if I pick up this one, it's going to create a hole. So let's say I pick up this stitch, and then there's another leg over here that I pick up, and so I did not go through with the yarn. These are just extra stitches that I need to pick up, and then I'll show you what to do with those when we go to the setup row. So I'm going to continue going up the sleeve. You can tell because this has a nice V, right? So we can have a row of stitches that we can use as a datum. So these are the last 2 stitches. So we just pick up through here, pick up a knit, pick up a knit, and you see how these all have on the same row. We can just use our knitting as a guide. So let me pick up a knit all the way around, and then we'll get into the setup rows. So I've picked up most of the stitches that I'm going to need. So let's pick up these final 6 and the extra bits right before we go. So let's pick up this random one, and this is just a pickup stitch. It's not a pick up a knit. And this random one, and then we'll go into the final 6 stitches here. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we pick up a knit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the purl. 6. Great. So now we have all of our stitches on our needles that we picked up and knit. So let's do the setup row, which is really easy. It's the same as we did for under the underarm. So I'm gonna magic loop my my project back together. If you're using stitch markers, right now is a good time to place the beginning of row marker. Like I said, I know where my beginning of row is because it's between the 2 purls, so I'm not going to do that. But then we just set it up. So for the basic version, you just purl, and then you knit around until the beginning of row, and then purl once more to the beginning, right till 1 before the beginning of the row marker. For the fancy version, you're going to purl, knit, knit, purl. But let me show you as we get to the stitches that we picked up what we're going to do. So these are the 2 stitches that we picked up. You can tell because I just put them on the needle whatever way. What we want to do is we want to twist stitches and then knit them together. So these 2 stitches, so this is the randomly picked up one, and then this is the picked up and knit one. We want to knit together so we have really close hole. So that one was pretty easy. It looked like it was going to go together. This one, let's twist this stitch and then knit through the back loop, and that looks like that's going to close the hole pretty well. And that's what I have for the holes, and I think that that works pretty good. Like I said, Suzanne Bryant has a better tutorial with more specifics that you can look at for that. But we're going to then knit in the round following the decrease instructions, which are similar decreases to on the body, but we're going to do them more often for the sleeves. Knit your sleeve using these instructions, pick up, finish knitting your other sleeve, and then we are good for the Troy Boy. And there you have it. We have a finished Troy Boy. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope this helped you with everything. Once again, you can follow me on my socials. I'm Jimmy Does Knitting on Instagram, Ravelry, and here on YouTube. I have a bunch of other videos. We have normal podcasts. We have special podcasts. And this is not my only sweater design and video. Feel free to go and check out my other videos. Till then, happy knitting. I hope you enjoyed. I will see you soon.